This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 134, an interview with Todd Henry about his new book, Louder Than Words, Harness the Power of Your Authentic Voice. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is August 6th, 2015. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder, the Content Marketing Podcast is live on iTunes and also on Stitcher. So if you're listening to this episode on the blog, you can click on over and subscribe. And if you use a different app for your podcast listening pleasure, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link in the blog post. Last week, we wrapped up our month-long focus on trends in content marketing by talking about the growing need to serve our mobile audiences. If you happen to miss that episode, feel free to check it out on iTunes or on Stitcher or via the RSS feed. This week, we are chatting with my friend, author, speaker, and fellow podcaster Todd Henry about his new book, Louder Than Words, Harness the Power of Your Authentic Voice. But first, it's time to check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. Kicking off today's news feed with some news out of Periscope. Our friends over there have been very busy with some new features, one of which includes the ability to access the analytics from your broadcasts. Now, if you have broadcast on Periscope before, you may notice that at the end of the broadcast, a panel pops up that gives you some basic analytics, including, for example, total time watched. Now, previously, this information was only available when that panel popped up, and then once you logged out or once you clicked away from Periscope, it would disappear. Now, when you're viewing your past broadcasts, you're going to be able to look at those analytics. They're going to be there whenever you want to access them. So there is no longer any need to rush and jot down those analytics as soon as they pop up. You will be able to access them whenever you need them. So good handy feature from our friends at Periscope. Also, some news out of Twitter this week. Twitter introduced an interesting new feature to its advertising segment, and it's called event targeting. And what this feature does is it allows you to build Twitter campaigns around major events that are going on. Now, the way to access it's available to all Twitter advertisers around the world. So you have a Twitter advertising account, you can access this feature. And what you do is you go to, I think the URL is ads.twitter.com. You click on the tools menu, and if you look on the drop down, you will see events calendar. And that will bring up a calendar of upcoming events that you can browse through and decide if any of those are, worth creating a campaign around. Now, I'm not sure what the criteria is around these events being listed, but they tend to be like major events in sports, in entertainment, things like that. And I was just scrolling through before I started podcasting here, and the events listed there right now are, for example, Disneyland's 60th anniversary, Back to School is in there, the MTV Music Video Awards, or Video Music Awards, whatever those are, that's there too. So, depending on your market, it's probably worth at least taking a look at and just try out this event targeting feature. If you see an event there that is relevant to your target audience, think about creating an event around it, and Twitter now makes it very easy for you to do that. Okay, our content hit of the week is an infographic, and it's called The What, When, and Who of Successful Emails. This was written by Jason Fiddler on the Constant Contact blog. And this really attracted me because people are always asking me about email. How long should an email be? How many images do I need? How many links should be there? What's the best time to send? Well, Constant Contact, being an email marketing provider, they have a whole lot of data at their disposal, and they dug into that data and came up with answers to a lot of those questions. And fortunately for us, they presented all that data in a very handy infographic. So recommend you check that out, and I will provide the link to that blog post in the post for this episode. Okay, that's it for this week's update. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please shoot it on over to us so that we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment, and I was really excited to be able to chat with Todd Henry again. We have had him on the podcast before. He is one of my personal favorite podcasters, and it was just delightful to be able to sit down and talk to him about his new book, Louder Than Words: Harness the Power of Your Authentic Voice. Todd Henry teaches leaders and organizations how to establish practices that lead to everyday brilliance. He's the author of 3 books, The Accidental Creative, Die Empty, and now Louder Than Words, which have been translated into more than a dozen languages, and he speaks and consults across dozens of industries on creativity, leadership, and passion for work. His book, Die Empty, was named by Amazon.com as one of the best books of 2013. And his latest book, Louder Than Words, is about how to develop an authentic voice that resonates, love that word, and creates impact. Best-selling author Tom Rath called it, quote, one of the best guides to living a meaningful life that I have ever read, unquote. Todd is also one of my personal favorite podcasters, and I have been following his podcast, The Accidental Creative, for several years, and absolutely love it. It's one that I never miss. So without further ado, here's our chat with Todd Henry about his latest book, Louder Than Words. Hey, Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rachel. It's great to be here.
Great. Or I should say, welcome back to the podcast.
That's right.
Because, I was looking through our records, and you are one of I think you're one of 2 repeat guests that we've had on. So.
Well, I am honored. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Todd, I just read your official bio, but for those of us in the audience who don't know you, would you give us a little personal introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I work with people who have to be brilliant every day as a function of their job, creative professionals. And I help them figure out, A, why it's so challenging to do that, why there are some unique pressures involved with having to make it up as you go and solve problems, and B, some structures and practices that they can build into their life to make them more effective every day. And so I get to work with some brilliant people, amazing people. I get to talk about things that I'm obviously very passionate about, as you probably hear in my voice. And in the course of that work, I've written 3 books. The first one, The Accidental Creative, came out in 2011. Die Empty came out in 2013. And the new book that is coming out soon is called Louder Than Words, which is about developing an authentic and compelling voice.
Yeah, and I might mention that the first 2 books are available on Amazon, and the second one will be, book number 3 will be out shortly. And I think there's even like a package deal that you can get on Amazon if you want to really overdose on Todd Henry.
Yeah, and I'm offering, right, I know that I think this is going to come out shortly before the book launches on August 11th. So if you're hearing this before August 11th, if you go to toddhenry.com/louderthanwords, there is a bundle of pre-order extras that I'm offering to people who pre-order the book. I'm going to be spending hours and hours online interacting with people and sharing and creating some custom live online events, a book club, lots of other great stuff we're going to be doing. So.
Awesome. Sounds wonderful. Well, as you mentioned, the latest book is called Louder Than Words: Harnessing the Power of Your Authentic Voice. So just give us a quick overview, quick bar napkin description of what this book is about and who it's for.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I've heard so much conversation over the last few years about building a platform and how you need to build a platform and get attention for your work. And all of these kinds of conversations can be very frustrating to me because I think sometimes people are so obsessed with getting attention that they fail to ask the question, what exactly is it that I want to build? What is it I'm trying to do? What is the ultimate impact I'm trying to have in the world? And so we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. And as a result, I'm seeing a lot of people in the marketplace building somebody else's body of work, right? Not their own body of work, because they're not operating from a place of authenticity. They're not, their work is not flowing from a sense of who they are, of what they care about, of a sharp and compelling vision that defines their work. And so as a result, a lot of people end up feeling adrift. And so what I wanted to do is write a book that really distills what is common among those people who have built brilliant, compelling bodies of work, whose work resonates deeply with their intended audience and who have had substantial impact over the course of time. What is it that's common among them? And is there anything we can deconstruct and apply to our own lives to help us do the same? Wonderful.
So can you give us a brief description when you talk about the authentic voice? What exactly is that?
So a lot of times we think about authenticity as transparency. It's I want to do what I want and just, let me be me and stop, fencing me in. And I, that's certainly one way to think about authenticity. But in this book, I really reframed it because what I discovered is that people who are doing compelling work, their audience can tell that they are invested deeply in the work that they're doing. They're not just putting up a front. They're not, quote unquote, branding themselves. We often talk about personal branding, and really what we mean when we say that is positioning yourself. Trying to position yourself so that other people will receive you. You'll be more palatable to them. But people whose work really resonates deeply, people who build substantive bodies of work, are those who are going beyond that. They're actually excavating, they're figuring out who they are, and they're investing themselves deeply in the work. And when you do that, Rachel, it makes a big difference to your audience. Once people see that you have skin in the game, it completely changes the equation, and people pay attention to what you're doing in so many ways. So when I talk about authenticity, that's really what I mean. I mean, putting who you are and what you care about into your work, infusing it on a daily basis so that it resonates more deeply.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And so the book is divided into three parts, and I want to cover each of those pretty briefly. The first is called The Journey of Developing Your Voice. And the name of chapter 1 put a big smile on my face because it's The Art of Resonance. What a great title for chapter 1. My favorite word in the English language. So tell us a little bit about this journey that you talk about of developing your authentic voice.
Well, I think maybe you should, right? Because it's your, yeah. So really, we all start out in our life, in our career as novices. I mean, it doesn't matter where we come from or what we've done prior to our current role or our current level of engagement. We all start off as novices. And I start one of the chapters with a quote from Ira Glass. He was being interviewed about doing great work. And he said, the problem with creative people, and I'm just going to paraphrase the quote, problem with creative people is that we have taste and we know what we like and what we don't like. And we see people who are doing great things and we want to do those great things as well, but we just don't have the skill to be able to pull it off. And so there's a gap that exists. And I've dubbed this gap for many years what I call the aspiration gap. I mean, even before I heard that Ira Glass interview, I've been calling it the aspiration gap because it is true that a gap exists between where we want to be and where we actually are. And that can be very dispiriting. But the reality is that there is a method, a process we can go through to help us close that gap, to grow our skills, to grow, and develop our voice to the point that we are closer to where we want to be creatively, and we are creating work that is work that we can be more proud of, that we also feel better about and feel reflects our own taste, and what we actually want to be creating. And so the art of resonance really is the art of going through that process, developing your voice to the point that you begin to close that gap and you begin to create work that you can be proud of and that connects with your audience deeply. And as I mentioned before, there are really three kind of core elements of that. The first is identity. And identity is about understanding who you are, what your work is rooted in, understanding the battle lines that are important to you, and making sure that you really understand what it is about you and about how you see the world that you want to put out there. The second part is vision. So it's not just enough to know who you are and know what you care about and what you want to put out there. It's also important to understand where do you want your work to go and how do you want to mobilize people toward some objective or towards some end. Because, if you're just a voice screaming in the wilderness, you're not going to be effective. You have to have an intended audience. So you have to define that intended audience, but you also have to empathize with them and understand that your voice isn't just what you say, it's how you're heard. So you have to have a vision for your work and how you want to connect with that audience. And then the final element is what I dubbed mastery. And mastery is common among all the people who have resonant voices. And mastery is really owning your platform and developing a set of skills that allows you to take your voice out into the world and accomplish your vision for your work. And so once you work on all three of these elements, you have identity working for you. Your work is deeply rooted. It's authentic. You're investing yourself in your work. A vision for your work. You've refined and defined your intended audience, and you've cultivated empathy for them. And then you begin mastering that set of skills that you need. You begin to see a virtuous upward cycle, and you start to close that gap. You start to grow in your capacity to express yourself, and ultimately to make your voice resonate with the people you're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's funny when people ask me, how did you come up with the name for your business? I said, it's one of the things that kind of emerged because, if you want to just go out there and make noise, go for it. There's no strategy required there. Just, do what you're going to do. But, if you want a message that really resonates with what your people are listening for, and on their side, once they hear something that really strikes a chord, they will really lean in and listen.
That's right. That's exactly right. And not only listen, but they will become carriers of your message, mm-hmm. right? And that's the beauty, is when your voice begins to resonate with others, then they then take that message and they begin to transmit it to their audience, to the people they're trying to reach. And that's when movements happen. That's when mm-hmm. things really take off. That's when you reach the tipping point, mm-hmm. Is when other people become resounding or resonators, right? Mm-hmm. with your message, and they begin to resound. They begin to transmit that message to their audience as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So part 2 is titled The Voice Engine. Tell us what that is and why it's important.
So the voice engine is really about those 3 elements that I mentioned before: identity, vision, and mastery, and really drilling down on, who are you? And as part of that, part of the identity piece, I encourage people to, for example, to write a manifesto, to really drill down on the principles or the tenets that guide your work, and the things that you really care about, and then to formalize that by writing a manifesto. Now, this isn't for public consumption. We often think of manifestos as something we're going to put out there in public as a way to mark our
nice
territory.
Bronze plaque in your lobby, right?
Exactly. Or exactly on the other end of the spectrum, you have the nice mission statement on the wall that hasn't been changed in 80 years.
Right.
And
if it's not stuck in a file drawer somewhere that no one's seen.
Exactly right. And so, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is an actionable working document, living document that informs your actions every day, and that really helps you stay rooted in what matters to you, that which is substantive to you. And so that's one example of defining your identity, or I should say excavating your identity and figuring it out. We all know that the best brands are not fabricated, they're excavated. And the same thing applies to you. It applies to you and your voice and your work. If you want to do work that resonates, you don't want to fabricate that. You don't want to fabricate some exterior positioning. You want to excavate it and put it out there. So that's really identity. That's one element of that. With regard to vision, we talked about cultivating an intended audience, cultivating a vision for that intended audience. I have written each of my 3 books, not to a demographic, not to a psychographic, but to one specific person. Each of my books has been written as if that person is sitting across the table from me, and I'm speaking these words to that person. Now, it's been a different person for each book, because each book is different and required a different audience. But as I was writing, I was thinking about that person, thinking about how they were interacting with their work, thinking of the problems that they were trying to solve. And as a result of that, I believe that the work is more empathetic than if I had just written to a demographic and said, I'm going to reach creative professionals between 24 and 49. And, that would be kind of silly, because there are so many different things that these people are facing. And so when you think about your work, if you want it to resonate deeply, consider not a group, not a psychographic, not a demographic, but think about one person. Now, sometimes people distill a demographic into what they would call an avatar, and say, okay, well, we're going to aim for this avatar. But that, I find, is often ineffective as well, because really all you're doing is speaking to a demographic. You just put a name on one person, right? And but when you think about one person, what do they like? What do they struggle with? What do they hope for? What are their aspirations? It makes it much easier to connect what you care about with what they care about, or to communicate it in a way that's going to resonate with them. And then finally, the third element, as I mentioned before, is mastery. And so I talk a lot in the book about the importance of staying in game shape. What does it look like for you to be able to deliver at a moment's notice, to be able to bring your work into the world at the most opportune time? Because timing is really important. And that's something we often overlook. A really brilliant idea that's delivered at the wrong time is not going to resonate in the same way. And so, we have to be careful to ensure that our work is timed properly if we want it to be effective, because ill-timed work is simply not going to resonate in the same way. And so part of that is staying in game shape. Do you have a set of daily disciplines that you practice so that you can become a master of your craft? For those of us who write, for example, I write a lot. I write books, obviously, that requires a lot of writing. I don't particularly like to write. It's not something I love doing, but I have a daily practice of writing every day. Why? Because if the only time I write is when the publisher is paying me in advance to write a book, my writing is going to be terrible. I know it's going to be terrible because I'm not in game shape. I'm not ready to go. It's going to take me a month to gear up to write a book. But if I stay in game shape, if I'm writing every day, even when I don't have an outlet for that writing, but I'm just writing because I want to stay in practice, stay in shape, then I'm going to be ready for that moment when I have to deliver something. And right now I'm delivering a lot. I'm writing a ton of articles for newspapers and magazines and interviews and all this stuff. And thank goodness that I've had that writing practice in my life, because it's just second nature to me. Whereas if I hadn't had that. So what is that for you? What is that in your life that you have to build in as a daily discipline so that you're ready when you need to deliver? So all three of these things work together again: identity, vision, mastery, in order to help us develop that voice.
Yep, absolutely. And so moving on to part 3 of the book, you called it Everyday Practices, which really got me excited because, and thank you for including a really practical aspect to this book. And it reminds me when I was interviewing Sally Hogshead about her latest book, and we talk about how marketers are out there hearing, be yourself, be yourself, be yourself. And really that advice taken in isolation is about as helpful as that first day of junior high when mom boots you out of the car and says, be yourself, honey. It's like,
that's right.
Thanks, Mom.
That's right.
Where do I even start? So tell me about the everyday practices for cultivating that voice.
Yeah. So I mentioned before about, for example, having a manifesto. One of the very simple daily practices is once you've written that manifesto, go back, look at your calendar, look at your schedule, look at the things that are required of you that day and ask, how am I going to infuse these principles, these things that I care about into my work today? Another thing that I talk about earlier in the book is identifying your pillars or your core attributes that make you most effective, and reminding yourself of those on a daily basis. I talk in the book a lot about space and about creating space in your life to be able to listen to your intuition. We're so busy, Rachel. I mean, we're running from thing to thing and filling every crack and crevice of our life with activity. And as a result, sometimes we don't have the space that we need to be able to listen to ourselves and to dive deeply into our ideas. And so one very simple daily practice is to devote time in your life to just sitting still. And it's incredibly painful. After about 2 minutes, your skin will start itching and you'll start, squirming in your seat, and every fiber of your being will want to reach for your smartphone to check your email. And then after about 7 minutes, you'll notice an amazing stillness, an amazing calm come over you because you have separated yourself. You've been that withdrawal, and now you're, but what's the funny thing that happens is that you have thoughts that you never knew that you had. You're making connections, solving patterns in your life that you never knew were there. But you've been so busy you haven't paid attention to them. And some of my biggest breakthroughs, some of my best ideas, my best thoughts, my most authentic ideas, the ones that are rooted in and stemming from what I care about deeply, come during those times of silence and stillness and isolation and solitude. But we have to make space for that if we really want our best work to emerge. So those are just a couple of ways that we can, on a daily basis, begin to root ourselves. And there's nothing new about this. I want to be very clear about that, right? Nobody's going to read this book and say, oh my gosh, Todd Henry has discovered that solitude and meditation can be important. No, of course not. Yeah. But we know these things, but we don't do them. We don't do them. We don't do what we know is right. And the reality is action defines whether we're going to be effective or not. It's not knowledge. Knowledge is useless without action. So we have to actually do these things. And so I give some ideas, some examples, some practices in the book of ways to apply these principles so that they can become just a part part of how you think about your daily life.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, it's funny because we don't make that quiet time, and at the same time we find ourselves wondering, why do I get so many good ideas in the shower? Why do I get so many ideas while I'm driving?
Exactly. Well, and it is the mindless and unexpected nature of those activities, right? When you're driving, the executive function of your brain is taken up with just making sure that you don't die, and
especially here in Houston.
Right. Yeah, oh, yes, exactly. And by the way, I'm coming to Houston in a couple of days. I'm going to be there for
awesome.
a friend. But it's so the executive function of your brain is taken up with those things, and so the rest of your brain is kind of free to wander, especially when we're doing those kinds of mindless tasks that we don't really pay attention to, and so. That's why we have those ideas. There's a really great book that came out several years ago called The Breakout Principle that I really enjoyed. And it was basically about how, the creative process is the process of immersing yourself in a problem, immersing yourself in stimuli, working really hard on it, and then taking a break and going and doing something mindless and allowing that space to free up your thoughts, to free up some of that stuff that's churning beneath the surface, and then come back and re-engage the problem. The problem is that we never actually break away. We're just constantly churning away. And so that space can really make all the difference in our world.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So one thing I noticed, Todd, in this part 3 of the book, you have 2 chapters. You have one called Practices for Developing Your Own Voice, and then you have a separate chapter for developing your team's voice. So what's the difference? How do we work that in?
Well, it's really challenging to develop a team's voice because we all have our own inclinations, we all have our own aptitudes, our own interests, our own sense of identity and what we care about. And so as a leader, your job is to really kind of play the role of, I almost wanted to say circus leader, but that's not not ringmaster. No. Yeah. As a leader, your job is really to weave together all of those threads into a stronger rope. And that's really what your job is as a leader. And so you have to provide boundaries for your team in which to play. Strong boundaries. We tend to think that creativity and freedom are enemies. Creativity and freedom are actually 2 sides of the same coin. Creativity does not exist without boundaries. You cannot have creative ideas without a sense of limitation. Orson Welles said the absence of limitation is the enemy of art. And so as a leader, part of your job is to instill those boundaries and to tell your team, hey, here's where we're going to play, here's where we're going to go, which means being clear even when you're not certain, which is really difficult, I think, for leaders sometimes. But that's really, as a leader, your role, really, your job really is to position your team to be successful, to find its voice, which means establishing clear boundaries, establishing some of these practices, and making sure that the team has a sense of identity. Who are we? What do we care about? Vision. Where are we going with our work? Who are we trying to reach? What does that mean to our audience? And then what skills do we need to master as a team so that we can bring that vision to reality? So the same 3 elements apply. It's just that as a leader, your job is to establish those boundaries so your team knows where it can play and where it can't.
Yep, absolutely. So Todd, as we look to developing our voices and building our platforms around that, how do we balance the authentic voice with this need to still present a professional image to basically to make the PR people happy without giving them heart attacks? Right,
and it's a real challenge, and I think that I don't think that most of us, when we are talking about what we care about, we're talking about authenticity, we're investing ourselves in a role. I don't think most of us are necessarily going to suddenly become unprofessional because we're doing that. I do think that in some ways, one of the biggest fears that people have with regard to authenticity is that it does mean complete transparency. And that's not what I'm talking about. That kind of authenticity is actually more damaging sometimes than it is helpful. Again, what I'm talking about is investing yourself fully. Your audience, your customers want to know that you care deeply about the issues that are formative to your organization. I think about Chipotle and their commitment to sustainability and how that's sort of taken form in what they do. Think about Patagonia and their they built an entire business around an ethic that matters to them. But in the book, I give examples like, for example, the Always brand from P&G and their Like a Girl campaign. I had the privilege of spending time with Edgar Sandoval and talking about how that campaign came to be. It's been watched 80 million times around the world. This campaign has, this video has, and it was really just the confluence of what the brand cares about, which is building self-confidence in teenage girls. It's something that they've been doing for decades, right? A cultural movement that was at play, which is sort of the empowerment movement that was happening among young women. And we'd seen that with Dove's campaign for real beauty and a couple of other things that were kind of going on. Yeah. So it's kind of the confluence of those two things, along with just honestly what it is that the market or the audience cared for. It was a very authentic expression. And you know what? They took hits for that. Some people said, "Oh, you're jumping on the bandwagon. Oh, you're just doing this because you know this is going to get views. It's going to help the brand." But something that was said to me in the interview when we were talking about that campaign was, listen, doing good in the world is not exclusive from doing good for your business. You can do good for your business while you're doing good in the world. Those things can exist together. I think sometimes we tend to think that if you're doing something that's good in the world, it has to be completely severed from from doing good for your business. And that's not the reality. So this was something that was good for the world. It actually was a fantastic campaign. It was a father of a young girl. I mean, it made me tear up as I saw this, and I realized, wow, I want her to internalize this message. But it was also good for business at the same time. It built the brand because it was rooted in something they cared about.
Yeah. So Todd, as you look back on the experience of writing this book, were there any surprises along the way as it came together?
There were a lot of stories that surprised me. A lot of things that I hadn't anticipated necessarily when I went into writing. I'll share one example of a story that really surprised me. And that is that Jimi Hendrix actually spent a period of time as the opening act for none other than the Monkees back in the 1960s. Wow. And so basically the way this went down was that, Jimi Hendrix's management was looking to broaden his appeal in America. And so they were looking for a tour that he could join where maybe he could go be the opening act. He was very popular in the UK, but not so much in the US. So they wanted to try to broaden his appeal. And the Monkees were looking to gain some credibility for their music because they were basically just known as a fabricated band that, had this TV show, and they were kind of goofy and they had a lot of teenage girl fans, but they didn't really, have a substantive musical body of work. So they were trying to broaden their musical credibility. So they thought, hey, it's a match made in heaven. We'll put Jimi Hendrix with the Monkees and voila, we'll both get what we want. But it didn't quite work out that way. So apparently Jimi Hendrix goes out on stage and starts playing his show, and the fans start booing him. They start chanting for the Monkees, and this went on for, about a month, I think, before finally Jimi Hendrix one night got really frustrated, took off his guitar, waved a profane gesture at the crowd, and stormed off stage. Now, if you were just watching Jimi Hendrix for the first time at that concert, and that was your only exposure to him, you were probably thinking, this was the most short-lived career in the history of music. This guy is completely flamed out. We're never going to hear from Jimi Hendrix again, right? But we all know in retrospect that's not what happened. We know the relative effect that Hendrix had on the music scene versus the Monkees. Jimi Hendrix was being true to himself. He understood what he cared about. He was making the music that mattered to him, but he just hadn't identified his audience yet. They just had not yet connected with his music. Now, he could have said, well, hey, how can I shape this music so it's more attractive to Monkees fans? And that would have been profoundly sad as well, because that we would never have had Jimi Hendrix. We never would have had what it is that he built, which has influenced so many people. So I would encourage people out there who are plugging away, who are trying to do great work every day, but who feel like maybe they just haven't quite found their audience yet. Keep working, have people around you to keep you aligned, to keep you moving forward. Find those people in your life who will speak truth to you. But make sure that you don't give up just because you're rejected by, a handful of Monkees fans or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just, make sure that you're staying true to who you are and you're building a body of work that is yours, that you're running your race and not somebody else's race.
Yeah, that's a great story. So Todd, we mentioned your earlier books, and of course this is number 3. How do you see, as you see those 3 books, how do you see the journey? How do you see your ideas progressing from book to book to book? And then of course that begs the question, what's next?
Oh, that's a great question, because actually I informally refer to these 3 books as the Creative Professional Trilogy.
Oh, nice.
And it's not quite as substantive and sweeping as the Lord of the Rings, but it's or Star Wars or something. But yeah, I mean, the Accidental Creative really was about organizing yourself so that you can have ideas when you need them most, which we all have to deal with. Die Empty then took that a step further and said, okay, now that we're organized, are we really doing the work that matters? Are we getting our best work out of us each day, the work that we really want to be doing? And then this book really is focused on, okay, now that we're doing work that matters to us, that, you know, we're getting that work out of us, are we shaping that work and are we refining that work so that it is connecting and resonating with the audience that we want to reach? And so in many ways, these books are a natural progression from the first to the third. And I think the next book is actually going to be, I'm already kind of working on it now, but the next book is going to kind of, in some ways, kind of cycle back and be a little bit like a rest note in the midst of the score, I think, for all of these books. And I'm very excited about it. I'll share more about it. I'll come back on and tell you about it when it's ready to go. How about that?
Absolutely. Look forward to it, Todd. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And would you remind us again how we can pre-order a copy of the new book and, of course, get our hands on those pre-order extras?
Of course, yeah. If you go to toddhenry.com/louderthanwords, just the title of the book, then everything is spelled out for you right there. And if you do it by August 11th, you can get on the pre-order extras and sign up for that list. And I look forward to spending time with you.
Yeah, and I have been to that page, and you've got some really sweet goodies there for us. So don't miss out. Okay, Todd, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for the great work that you do.
Thank you.
Many thanks again to Todd Henry for chatting with us today. Again, that URL is toddhenry.com/louderthanwords, all one word. And if you pre-order the book by August 11th, you will get a whole bunch of goodies. And I was just over on the site, and he's got some really, really fantastic giveaways for everyone who pre-orders. If you have any questions about our conversation, or if you want to add to the conversation about harnessing your authentic voice, I would love to hear from you, and I will give that contact info at the end of the podcast. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. For today's tip, I want to talk about building a community. You know, the way I found out about Todd's latest book is the fact of just being a part of his community. And one thing that Todd has done so beautifully over the years is he has built relationships with the people who support him. You know, we don't just hear from him when he wants something. He is out there on a regular basis. He does a weekly podcast. He's blogging, putting out great materials, and he's cultivating those relationships. He's encouraging conversation, and he's really he is really out there talking to the folks who support him. So when he does come forth with, let's say, a new book that he's looking to promote, he knows that he can count on those folks in his community to help him get the word out. So as content marketers, you know, Todd Henry is a great role model for us because we need to be community builders as well. And you know, part of the danger of being very focused on our return on investment is that it's very easy to get into that what's in it for me mindset. You know, everything you do, what's in it for me? How's this going to drive sales? But, you know, when we focus our efforts on building those communities, you know, every time we invest in those communities, it really is like an investment in the bank. That way, when we do come on with a marketing message, or if we do request their support for something, we're going to have it. You know, those folks are going to remember that relationship. And in the end, those relationships will pay off very handsomely, not just today or tomorrow, but for years to come. Okay, campers, that is it for me today. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I want to say thank you again to our special guest, Todd Henry. Again, if you want to pre-order his book and get your hands on those pre-order goodies, that URL is toddhenry.com/louderthanwords. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or via the RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so appreciate that. For more information about content marketing, you're welcome to visit our website at resonancecontent.com, where you'll also find links to our pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. As always, I like to leave you with a quote, and today's comes from, big surprise, Todd Henry's book, Louder Than Words. He says, quote, "Those who embrace a disciplined, long arc pursuit of brilliance are the ones who work their way onto a path of unique and valuable contribution." Unquote.
Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Take care.